They are playing the recording again. My own voice fills the chamber thin, distorted by the archival compression, but unmistakably mine. The words I spoke 14 months ago to the High Presidium of the Aethkari Dominion, in the formal address chamber where I had stood, perhaps 600 times across my career, without once feeling afraid. Respected Presidium, esteemed hierarchs, I submit that the human delegation's proposal for mutual territorial recognition should be accepted without amendment. I further submit with the full weight of my diplomatic tenure that any military action against the Sol system would constitute a catastrophic strategic error from which this dominion may not recover. The recording stops. The silence is a held breath. Chief Adjudicator Molarin leans forward. The bioluminescent markings along her jaw, the ones that signal judicial displeasure in our species, are burning so brightly that the clerk beside her shifts in his seat. Seylun Vaath, she says, you are charged with seditious counsel to the Presidium, undermining wartime morale through defeatist rhetoric, and conspiring to elevate an alien power above the strategic interests of the Dominion. How do you answer? I look at the gallery. 300 faces. Colleagues I served beside for decades. Not one will meet my eyes. I answer, I say, that I was right. The sound that moves through the chamber is not a gasp. It's a collective flinch, as though the words carried physical weight. Molarin's bioluminescence flares white. The defendant will... I was right, Chief Adjudicator. Every word I spoke to the Presidium was accurate. Every projection I submitted was conservative. Every recommendation I offered would have preserved the Dominion. And you are trying me for it, because the alternative is admitting that the 92 billion people who are now dead, our people, citizens of this Dominion, died because this body chose to laugh. Remove the defendant from... You laughed. My voice isn't raised. I learned that from the humans. Volume is weakness. Stillness is threat. I stood where I'm standing now and told you what would happen, and Grand Hierarch Tylorn leaned back in his chair and laughed. And now Taylorn is ash, and Varenthi Prime is ash, and the Ninth Fleet is ash. And you need someone to have been wrong, because if I was right, then every death is yours. The guards reach me. Their grip on my arms is not gentle. So yes, I say, as they pull me from the podium. I answer that I was right. And I answer that being right is the loneliest thing I've ever done. They return me to my cell. It is not cruel, this cell. The Aethkari do not practice cruelty against our own. Or we didn't, before we learned it from watching what we did to others. The walls are smooth, bite stone, temperature regulated to comfortable warmth. There is a cot, a sanitation unit, a small window that looks out over the ruined skyline of Keth Varos, our capital, where reconstruction drones move like slow insects against the perpetual gray. The city was not bombed. I want to be precise about that. The humans did not bomb Keth Varos. What happened to Keth Varos was that its infrastructure collapsed under the weight of a war economy that drained every maintenance fund, every civic allocation, every domestic reserve into the fleets we sent to Sol. The humans didn't have to destroy our capital. We did it ourselves, trying to destroy them. I sit on the cot. I close my eyes. And because there is nothing else left, because the trial is theater, and the verdict is predetermined, and the only audience that matters is whatever future historian might access this record, I begin at the beginning. Not my beginning. Theirs. I first saw a human 16 months before the trial. Formal Concord reception, neutral station Apex 7, the diplomatic hub, where the 4 major galactic powers conducted business that was too important for home territory and too delicate for open channels. The Aethkari Dominion had held senior diplomatic standing at Apex 7 for 11 centuries. We were not the largest power the Corvith hegemony claimed that, but we were the oldest continuous member, and in galactic politics, continuity is its own currency. My role was senior cultural liaison, which meant I was the person who explained to new species why the seating arrangements mattered, and which fork to use at the reception banquet, and why it was inadvisable to make direct eye contact with a Corvith delegate for longer than 4 seconds. The humans had been granted provisional observer status 3 years earlier, a formality. Their territory was small one system, a few struggling colonies. Their technology was functional, but unremarkable. Their fleet was negligible. They had been placed on the agenda for formal recognition, which in practice meant they would receive a minor territorial charter, a few trade concessions, and a seat so far from the central table that they would need amplification equipment to hear the proceedings. I was assigned to their delegation because no one else wanted the task. The ambassador's name was Elena Vasquez. She arrived on Apex 7 with a staff of 4, wearing a dark blue uniform I later learned was adapted from something called a naval dress code, and carrying a single case of documents, physical documents, printed on compressed plant fiber, which the Corvith attaché beside me found so primitive he actually photographed it for his personal amusement feed. I met her in the reception corridor, standard greeting protocol. I bowed, which is our custom. She extended her hand, which is theirs. "Ambassador Vasquez," I said, "welcome to Apex 7. I am Senior Liaison Vaath. I've been assigned to assist your delegation during the recognition proceedings." She looked at me. And this is the part I need to describe carefully, because it matters. Elena Vasquez was not physically imposing. She was shorter than me by perhaps a quarter arm's length. Her hair was dark, streaked with gray at the temples. Her face was lined in ways that I recognized, even across species barriers, as the evidence of sustained fatigue. She was perhaps 50 standard cycles old, though human aging is difficult for us to read precisely. But when she looked at me, something happened that I had never experienced in 600 diplomatic contacts across 14 species. She saw me, not my rank, not my function, not the Dominion's interests projected through my face. She looked at me the way one specific person looks at another specific person, and she said, "Seylun, thank you. We've read your work on cross-cultural protocol adaptation. It's the reason we requested you specifically." They had requested me. I hadn't known that. Your early paper on nonverbal dominant signaling in Corvith negotiations saved our trade attaché from a serious error during preliminary talks last year, she continued. "I wanted to thank you in person." I didn't know what to say. In 2 decades of liaison work, no delegation had ever read my academic publications, let alone thanked me for them. "That is very kind, Ambassador." "It's not kind," she said. "It's accurate. There's a difference." She smiled. It was a small smile, contained, the kind that suggested the full version was reserved for people she trusted, and that trust was not given quickly. I liked her immediately. This is important to admit, because what happened later cannot be understood without it. I liked her, and I did not want to, and that tension informed every mistake I failed to make and every correct warning that no one listened to. Over the next 11 days, I watched Elena Vasquez conduct herself through the recognition proceedings with a precision that troubled me. She was not aggressive. She did not posture. She did not make threats or grandiose claims about human capability. She sat in her distant seat and listened. She took notes by hand on that compressed plant fiber with a small instrument that deposited pigment through pressure. When she was given an opportunity to address the assembly, She spoke briefly, specifically, and with a deference that I initially mistook for weakness. It was not weakness. I understood this on the fourth day, when the Corvith delegate, a senior hegemon named Braal, whose diplomatic style could be charitably described as dominance, Theater interrupted her remarks to suggest that humanity's territorial claim was ambitious for a species still burning hydrocarbons. The gallery murmured with amusement. Braal's jaw mandibles spread in the Corvith expression of satisfied contempt. Vasquez waited for the sound to die. Then she said, "Senior Hegemon, you're correct that our energy infrastructure is primitive by Concord standards. But I notice your delegation has been running spectral analysis on our colony ship's hull composition. For the past 3 days, your scanning equipment leaves a thermal signature our instruments can detect. And I'm curious, what about primitive hydrocarbon burners warrants that level of material interest?" Braal's mandibles closed. "If you'd like samples," Vasquez continued, "we're happy to provide them through proper channels. The alloy is a titanium-carbon lattice we developed for deep ocean pressure vessels. We adapted it for space applications. It's not classified. We just haven't been asked." She sat down. The silence lasted 6 seconds, which in diplomatic chambers is a geological age. I wrote in my private journal that evening, "This species listens before it speaks, learns before it acts, and offers what others try to steal. Monitor closely." I wish anyone else had been monitoring. The recognition vote was scheduled for day 12. By all procedural standards, it should have been perfunctory. Humanity met every criterion: stable governance, demonstrated non-aggression, functional diplomatic infrastructure, willingness to abide by conquered arbitration. On day 10, Grand Hierarch Seylun arrived at Apex 7. This was unprecedented. The Grand Hierarch Supreme Executive of the Ithkari Dominion, commander of our combined military forces, the individual who embodied 11 centuries of accumulated political authority, did not attend recognition proceedings. Recognition was administrative. It was beneath his attention. His arrival was a message. The entire station understood it. I understood it. I requested a private audience. This was within my rights as senior liaison, though it was rarely exercised and never comfortable. Seylun received me in his temporary chambers, a suite that his advance team had redecorated in full Dominion aesthetic within 4 hours, because Seylun did not enter rooms that did not already look like his. He was tall, even for Ithkari. His bioluminescent markings were surgically enhanced, a fashion among the upper hierarchy that was technically illegal and universally practiced. His eyes had the specific quality of someone who had made decisions affecting billions and had found the weight manageable. "Vaath," he said, "you've been spending time with the humans." "It's my assignment, Grand Hierarch. And your assessment?" I chose my words with care. They are more capable than their infrastructure suggests. Their ambassador is exceptionally skilled. I recommend full recognition without restrictive amendments. Seylun made a sound, a low harmonic that our species uses to indicate polite dismissal of something not worth extended consideration. "Their territory sits across the Varenthi approach. Our fleet expansion requires that corridor within 2 cycles. There are alternative corridors, slower alternatives, 17% efficiency loss on the Corvith frontier supply line." He looked at me the way one looks at a tool that has become slightly misaligned. "I did not come to Apex 7 to recognize them, Vaath. I came to assess whether they will accept reclassification as a protectorate voluntarily, or whether their territory needs to be reacquired." Reacquired. The word was a euphemism wrapped in a legality. Under Concord law, unrecognized species had no territorial sovereignty. If the recognition vote failed or was delayed indefinitely, humanity's space was legally unclaimed. and unclaimed space adjacent to a major power's strategic corridor had a very specific and very brief future. Grand Hierarch, I said, I strongly advise against this course. Noted. The humans are not what they appear. Their technology is primitive. Their hull metallurgy is beyond anything in the Concord database. Their ambassador detected Corvith scanning equipment that our own intelligence services didn't know was present. Their cultural history. Vaath, he said my name the way you close a door. I have read the intelligence assessments. 1 system, 12 warships, no faster-than-light communications beyond standard Concord relay access. Their fleet is a defensive perimeter around a single star. They are not a threat. They are an inconvenience occupying strategically necessary space, and I will resolve that inconvenience with the minimum force required. Your role is to ensure the diplomatic cover holds. Are we clear? I should have stopped. Every survival instinct, every career reflex, every lesson I'd learned in 22 years of navigating Dominion politics told me to bow, say yes, Grand Hierarch, and begin drafting the diplomatic framework that would make theft look like governance. Instead, I said, Grand Hierarch, I formally request that my dissent be recorded in the Presidium Archive. His bioluminescence shifted a cold blue that I had seen only twice in my career, both times directed at individuals who were subsequently removed from their positions. Dissent regarding what, specifically? Regarding any military action against the Sol system. I believe it would be a catastrophic strategic error. I believe the humans possess capabilities we have not accurately assessed, and I believe that the species we are about to betray will respond in ways we are not prepared to survive. The silence was absolute. You are afraid, Seylun said, of 12 ships. I am afraid, I said, of a species that built those 12 ships while knowing we had 9,000. I am afraid of what it means that they came to this station with 4 people and a case of paper documents, and did not appear afraid. I am afraid, Grand Hierarch, because in 600 diplomatic contacts across my career, I have never met a delegation that behaved the way humans behave, and I cannot identify what I'm looking at. And in my experience, the thing you cannot identify is the thing that kills you. Seylun stared at me for a long time. Then his jaw shifted into the configuration that, in our species, denotes amusement at the expense of the speaker. Dramatic, Vaath. Truly, you should have pursued the theatrical arts. He turned back to his displays. I was dismissed. I went directly to my quarters and filed the formal dissent. I flagged it with the highest priority code my clearance allowed. I appended my personal analysis, my cultural notes, my transcript of every interaction with Vasquez. The filing system confirmed receipt. No one accessed the document for the next 14 months. The first person to open it, according to the access log, was the prosecutor, preparing my trial. The recognition assembly convened at 6th bell. Full attendance. Every delegation present, including species who rarely attended administrative sessions, which should have told me that whatever Seylun had planned, he had coordinated it with at least some of the other powers. Elena Vasquez entered the chamber with her 4 staff members. She was wearing the same dark blue uniform. She was carrying no documents this time. Her hands were empty. She saw me in the gallery and nodded. A small gesture. Collegial. The nod of one professional acknowledging another across a room. I did not nod back. I was already watching the security deployment and counting the additional personnel that had appeared overnight. 12 Ethkari guards in the chamber where normally there were 4, armed with sidearms that our security forces used only in active threat scenarios. The session opened. Procedural formalities. The recognition motion was entered. Discussion period commenced. And then Seylun stood. He did not need to stand. The Grand Hierarch could have spoken from his seat, and every ear in the chamber would have attended. But he stood, and the standing was the performance, the declaration that what followed was not a comment, but an act. The Aethkari Dominion moves to table the recognition motion indefinitely, he said, pending a formal review of the human delegation's territorial claims in the Varenthi approach corridor. Vasquez did not move. Her expression did not change. But I saw her left hand, the one resting on her thigh below the table's edge, where she thought no one could see close, slowly into a fist, then open. Furthermore, Taylorn continued, the Dominion formally invokes Article 17 of the Concord Security Framework, reclassifying the Sol system as an unresolved territorial dispute, requiring mediated resolution under Aethkari oversight. Article 17. I felt the blood drain from my extremities. Article 17 allowed a major power to assume administrative control of disputed territory during the resolution period. It had been invoked 11 times in Concord history. Every single time, the resolution had concluded with the invoking power absorbing the territory permanently. Vasquez rose. Point of order. The Sol system is not disputed territory. Humanity has maintained continuous habitation and governance for... Ambassador Vasquez? Taylorn's voice cut across hers like a blade across fabric. Humanity has not yet been recognized by this body. Unrecognized species do not possess standing to raise points of order. Please be seated. The chamber was silent. The Corvith delegation's mandibles were spread in that expression, again, satisfied contempt, but this time I recognized something beneath it. Anticipation. Vasquez remained standing. I address this body not under Concord procedural authority, but under the universal diplomatic principle of security, Taylorn said. The guards moved. Not quickly, they were professionals, and this was a diplomatic chamber, and the choreography had been planned in advance. Two of them approached Vasquez from either side with the specific, measured pace of personnel executing a rehearsed action. Ambassador Vasquez, Taylorn said, you are being detained under Article 17, Section 4 Administrative Custody of Foreign Nationals during Territorial Dispute Resolution. This is not an arrest. Your rights under Humanitarian Convention are preserved. You will be... Seylun. Vasquez said my name. Not loudly, not desperately. She said it the way she had said it on the first day, the way one specific person addresses another specific person. Seylun, for the record, we came here in good faith. The guards took her arms. Her 4 staff members were already being escorted from their seats. One of them, a young man whose name I later learned was David Park, turned to look at me as he was led past, and his expression was one I could not categorize at the time, but have since identified. It was pity. He pitied me. He was being detained by my government, and he looked at me with pity. The chamber erupted into procedural chaos. 14 delegations speaking simultaneously. The Corvith delegate was already entering a formal co-sponsorship of the Article 17 motion. 3 other powers followed within minutes. I sat in the gallery. I did not speak. I did not move. I watched Elena Vasquez walk out of the chamber with guards on both arms and her back straight and her chin level, and I understood, with the specific clarity that comes only when it is too late to act, that I was watching the end of something. Not the end of humanity. The end of us. What followed was not technically an execution. I need to be precise about this, because the trial prosecutor has argued that my use of that word constitutes defamation of the Dominion, and because precision is the only weapon I have left. Elena Vasquez died in administrative custody 17 hours after her detention. The official cause was acute physiological distress during enhanced interview. Enhanced interview is our term for interrogation, conducted with pharmaceutical assistance. The pharmaceuticals were calibrated for Aethkari physiology. Human physiology, it turned out, responded differently. Specifically, the compound that, in our species, suppresses resistance and encourages cooperative disclosure triggered, in humans, a cascading cardiac event. Vasquez's heart of humans have a single, four-chambered cardiac organ of remarkable power and remarkable fragility, went into a rhythm our medical staff didn't recognize and couldn't correct. She died on an interview table in a room without windows, 67 minutes into a session intended to extract the technical specifications of human hull metallurgy. They were interrogating her about metal. I learned this 41 hours later. Not through official channels, the Dominion classified the death immediately. I learned it because a medical technician named Orev, who had been present and who could not sleep afterward, came to my office and told me in a voice that was very steady and very quiet, and not steady at all. She didn't scream, Orev said. The compound, when it hit her system, she must have known something was wrong. Her heart rate spiked, but she didn't scream. She said a name. I think it was a name, and then she was gone. What name? It was human phonetics. Started with a hard consonant. It might have been a person or a place. I'm sorry, it happened very fast. I dismissed Orev. I sat at my desk for a period of time I cannot accurately report. Then I accessed the diplomatic communication logs for Apex 7. The human's 4 remaining staff members had been transferred to a detention facility on Varenthi Prime within 6 hours of the arrest. Standard procedure for Article 17 detainees. They would not have been told about Vasquez. They would have no communication with Sol, except. The Concord's diplomatic relay system operates on a handshake protocol. When an ambassador is formally detained, the relay automatically transmits a status update to the ambassador's home government. This is an automated function. It cannot be overridden by the detaining power. It is built into the physical architecture of the relay network. The status update for Ambassador Vasquez would have transmitted approximately 90 seconds after her detention was formally logged. It would have contained her name, her status classification, and the identity of the detaining authority. And 17 hours later, when her status was updated from detained to deceased custody, that update would have transmitted as well. The humans knew. I ran the timeline. The death status transmitted at 14:07 station time. I accessed the human communication traffic logs. My clearance still permitted this, a bureaucratic oversight that the prosecution has since cited as evidence of my premeditation. At 14:07, human communication traffic volume, standard. At 14:08, standard. At 14:09, 0. Every human transmission in the galaxy stopped simultaneously. Every beacon, every colony relay, every research station, every ship, all of it went silent at once. Not gradually, not system by system. All of it, at the same time. This should not have been possible. The human network used Concord's standard relay architecture. There was no mechanism for a simultaneous system-wide shutdown. To achieve what I was looking at, every single human installation would have had to independently decide to go silent within the same 60-second window. Unless it wasn't independent, unless there was a communication system we didn't know about. I flagged this in an urgent report. I sent it to the Presidium, to military intelligence, to the Grand Hierarch's office. I marked it with every priority code I had. No one responded. The silence lasted 6 hours. I want to describe what those 6 hours felt like, because I think the experience itself is part of what I'm being tried for the crime of having understood what was coming while my government celebrated. In the Presidium, the human silence was interpreted as confirmation of impotence. The logic was straightforward. Humanity had learned of their ambassador's death and had shut down their communications in shock. A primitive grief response, a species reeling The appropriate next step, the Presidium concluded, was to dispatch the Ninth Fleet to Sol immediately, before the humans could organize any kind of response. Grand Hierarch Tylorn authorized the deployment at 1530, approximately 90 minutes into the silence. 9,000 warships. The largest single-fleet deployment in Dominion history. Their orders were to arrive at Sol, demand unconditional surrender of all territorial claims, and if refused, neutralize human military assets and establish administrative control. The Ninth Fleet departed at 1600. I was not consulted. I was not informed. I learned of the deployment from the public announcement feed, the same channel that announced weather patterns and transit schedule changes. I went to Taylor's office. His aide blocked me. I went to the Presidium. The session was closed. I went to the military intelligence liaison and was told my clearance had been suspended pending review. So I went to the Communication Monitoring Center, a low-security facility that tracked general traffic patterns across the sector, and I sat at an empty terminal, and I watched. At 1630, 2.5 hours into the silence, I noticed something. The human transmissions had stopped, yes, but the power draw on their relay nodes had not. Every human relay station in the network was still active, fully powered, processing nothing. Or processing something that didn't register on our monitoring equipment. At 1700, I ran a spectral analysis on the relay power signatures. What I found was a carrier wave buried beneath the noise floor of standard communications, a frequency our equipment classified as background radiation, because it was so far outside the expected communication band that the filters excluded it automatically. The humans had not gone silent. They had gone private. For the next 3 hours, I sat at that terminal and tried to decode the carrier wave. I failed. The encryption, if it was encryption, operated on principles I couldn't identify. But I could measure the traffic volume, and the traffic volume was enormous. Petabytes of data were moving across the human network every second, invisible to every monitoring system in the Concord. I sent another report. I flagged it emergency. I used language that was, in retrospect, intemperate. I wrote, "The humans are coordinating. They have a communication system we cannot detect and cannot compromise. The Ninth Fleet is entering an operational environment with no intelligence advantage. Recommend immediate recall." The response came from Taylor's aide. 4 words, "Your clearance is suspended." I remained at the terminal. I watched the invisible river of human data surge beneath the galaxy's awareness, like a current beneath ice. At 20:07, exactly 6 hours after the silence began, the carrier wave stopped, and the broadcast began. It arrived everywhere at once. Every diplomatic channel, every military frequency, every commercial relay, every species in the Concord received it simultaneously, in their own language, with their own diplomatic formatting conventions, calibrated to their own cultural communication norms. This alone was a revelation that should have stopped the war. The humans had translated their message into 14 galactic languages, some of which they had been exposed to for less than 3 years, with idiomatic precision that our own professional diplomatic translation corps could not have matched. They had formatted each version according to the recipient species' specific conventions of formal address, paragraph structure, and emphasis hierarchy. They had done this in 6 hours. The message was not long. I will reproduce the Athkari version in full, because it is now a matter of public record, because it was read into evidence at my trial, and because I believe that no summary can substitute for the actual words. To the governing bodies of the Galactic Concord, at 14:07, station time, cycle 4471.306. Ambassador Elena Maria Vasquez of the United Human Territories died in Athkari administrative custody. She was 53 years old. She had 2 children. She played the cello. She was afraid of deep water, but loved the ocean. She went to space because she believed that the universe was large enough for everyone. She was detained for the crime of representing her species. She was killed by an interrogation compound, administered for the purpose of extracting metallurgical data that she would have provided freely if asked, because that was who she was. We do not ask for an apology. We do not ask for reparations. We do not ask for the return of her body, though we know where it is. We ask for nothing. To the 8th Kari Dominion specifically, your 9th Fleet departed Varenthi staging grounds at 1600 today, bearing course for the Sol system. We know its composition, its command structure, its route, and its operational orders. We have known the details of your military planning for the Sol corridor since before our ambassador arrived at Apex 7, because we have been inside your communication network for 11 months. We came to the Concord in good faith. We sent Elena because she was the best of us, the most patient, the most hopeful, the most willing to believe that this could work. You killed the best of us. The 9th Fleet will be met. We do not say this as a threat. We say it as a courtesy that Elena would have wanted us to extend. This is the last courtesy. United Human Territories. Joint Command. I read the message at the monitoring terminal. I read it 3 times. My hands were shaking, a physiological response my species exhibits under extreme stress, and I could not make them stop. Around me, the monitoring center had erupted. Analysts were shouting. 3 separate alarm protocols had triggered simultaneously. Someone was attempting to reach 9th Fleet Command on priority channels, but the fleet was already in transit and would not receive updated orders for another 11 hours. I stood up. I walked to the center of the room. I said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Recall the fleet." No one listened to me. Recall the fleet. They've been inside our communications for 11 months. They know everything. Force composition, deployment protocols, encryption architecture, everything. The 9th Fleet is walking into a prepared position against an enemy that has had nearly a year to study our every capability. The senior analyst on duty, a military liaison named Tarith, looked at me with undisguised contempt. They have 12 ships, Vaath. They have 12 ships that we know about. Our deep-range sensors cover the entire... Our deep-range sensors use detection algorithms that they've had access to for 11 months. They know our sensor parameters. They know what we can see and what we can't. I was shouting now. I had never shouted in a professional setting. They let us see 12 ships because they wanted us to see 12 ships. Tarith turned back to his console. Someone remove Liaison Vaath from the monitoring center. His clearance has been suspended. I was escorted out. The guards were polite. They always are, right up until they aren't. Back in my quarters, I sat on the floor. Not the chair, the floor, because somehow the floor felt more honest, and I reread the human transmission on my personal device. She played the cello. Of everything in the message, those 4 words were the ones that lodged, not the strategic revelations, not the implicit threat. 4 words about a musical instrument I'd had to look up in the cultural database, a wooden box with strings that produces sound through friction, one of an entire family of devices humans built to make vibrations in air for no practical purpose beyond the experience of beauty. They put it in a declaration of war. They told us she played the cello. They wanted us to know who we killed. Not what a diplomat, an asset, a representative. Who? A person who was afraid of deep water and played a friction string instrument and believed the universe was large enough. I understood, sitting on that floor, that the humans were not enraged. Rage is hot and blind and spends itself. What I was reading was something colder, something architectural, They had used 6 hours not to grieve, but to build. And what they had built was a message designed to land differently in every species' psychology simultaneously, each version calibrated to produce the specific emotional and cognitive response that would be most disabling for that recipient. The Eighth-Kari version emphasized the futility of our military position. The Corvith version, which I accessed later, emphasized the humans' demonstrated intelligence penetration of the Concord's communication infrastructure, targeting the Corvith cultural terror of information asymmetry. The version sent to the Devari Collective emphasized Elena's personal qualities, targeting the Devari's cultural reverence for individual life. One message, 14 weapons, each aimed at a different heart. The Ninth Fleet reached the Sol system border at 3:17 the following day. I was not in the monitoring center. My clearance was still suspended. But the military communication traffic was heavy enough that it bled into civilian channels, and I heard the fragments from my quarters. Fleet Commander Orath, a competent officer, experienced, not a fool, had adjusted formation based on the human transmission. He suspected a trap. He deployed long-range reconnaissance screens. He slowed his approach to allow sensor sweeps of the system interior. His reconnaissance screens found nothing. No fleet. No defensive installations beyond the 12 ships the Dominion had previously catalogued, now positioned in a standard orbital defense pattern around the third planet. 12 ships against 9,000. Orath, to his credit, hesitated. He requested updated orders from the Presidium. The Presidium, which had spent the previous 11 hours in emergency session debating the human transmission, and which had concluded over the objections of precisely one member, whose name will be familiar, that the transmission was a bluff designed to forestall military action, ordered Orath to proceed. He proceeded. The Ninth Fleet crossed the system threshold at 0430. They advanced in standard conquest formation, a broad crescent designed to envelop a defensive position and overwhelm it through converging fire from multiple vectors. At 4:47, the 12 human ships broke orbit and moved to intercept. 12 ships, advancing directly into the center of a 9,000 ship formation. No evasive maneuvering, no attempt to concentrate against a weak point. They simply flew forward. Fleet Commander Orath, who was recording a command log that I have since obtained through channels I will not disclose to this court, said, "They're committing suicide. This is a gesture. All batteries, prepare to engage on my—" He stopped speaking. At 0448, the Ninth Fleet sensor network registered an anomaly. It began at the system's edge, the outer boundary of the heliosphere, the point where Sol's stellar wind meets interstellar space, and it propagated inward at a velocity our instruments couldn't accurately measure, because they were not designed to track objects moving that fast. What the sensors captured, in the 0.3 seconds before they were overwhelmed, was a series of spatial displacement signatures, hundreds of them, then thousands. Ships were arriving, not from any direction that made navigational sense, not along transit corridors or approach vectors, but from everywhere. They were materializing out of what our physics classified as empty space, and they were doing so at a rate that the fleet's tactical computer classified as a sensor malfunction because the numbers exceeded its maximum input parameters. Orath's command log, in the last entry before the log was interrupted, "Where how many tactical? Give me a count." The tactical officer's response, audible in the background, "Sir, the system is rejecting the count. I'm reading the count is still going up, sir. It hasn't stopped. It's—" The log ends. Everyone learned later what the Ninth Fleet encountered. The 12 ships were real. They were the only ships humanity had ever allowed the galaxy to see. They were, in a sense, a performance the visible military, of a species that had learned, from its own history, that showing your full strength to strangers was an invitation to preemptive annihilation. Behind those 12 ships was a fleet that humanity had built in shipyards buried inside asteroids, manufactured using resources extracted from gas giant atmospheres, assembled in the deep spaces between stars where no sensor network had ever been deployed because no species had ever considered those voids worth monitoring. 11,000 warships, not 9,000, not a matching force, 11,000. Built in secret over 3 decades, from the moment humanity had first detected alien transmissions and understood that the galaxy was not empty and not safe. They had come to the Concord with 12 ships and a case of paper documents and an ambassador who played the cello, and behind them, in the dark, was a fist they had prayed they would never need to close. The engagement lasted 14 minutes. I will not describe it in detail, because the details are a matter of public record, and because the word engagement implies a contest, and what happened was not a contest. The human fleet was faster, more maneuverable, and equipped with weapon systems that operated on principles our military technology division has since described as theoretically consistent, but practically unanticipated. Of the Ninth Fleet's 9,000 warships, 4,600 were destroyed. 3,800 surrendered after their command networks were disabled by a coordinated electronic warfare assault that shut down every ship simultaneously, not by overpowering their systems, but by using the command codes that the humans had extracted during their 11 months inside our communication network. The remaining 600 ships, including Fleet Commander Orath's flagship, were physically seized by human boarding teams that cut through hull plating with tools our metallurgists have since been unable to replicate. Fleet Commander Orath survived. In his formal deposition, obtained during the post-war tribunal, he described the boarding action in a single sentence. They came through the walls and they did not fire until we did. They did not fire until we did. They boarded 9,000 ship fleet's command vessels with cutting tools and sidearms, and they did not fire until we did. The destruction of the Ninth Fleet should have ended it. In any rational strategic calculus, in any war game, any simulation, any theoretical framework our military academies had ever produced, the loss of your primary fleet to a force you didn't know existed should produce an immediate request for terms. Seylun did not request terms. I need to explain why. Because it is the hinge on which everything that followed turned. And because the prosecutor at my trial has argued that my failure to prevent the next phase constitutes active collaboration with the human enemy. She is wrong, but she is not unreasonable, and the distinction matters. Seylun did not request terms, because requesting terms would require admitting that he had been wrong, not mistaken wrong, that his strategic assessment, his intelligence analysis, his decision to detain and interrogate and ultimately kill a diplomat had been based on a fundamental misreading of the species he was facing, that the warnings he dismissed were accurate, that the voice he silenced was the only one telling the truth. To request terms would be to validate me, and Seylun would burn the Dominion to ash before he would validate me. This is not an exaggeration. This is not bitterness. This is a structural analysis of how authoritarian leadership fails. The mechanism is always the same. The leader's identity becomes inseparable from the policy, and any evidence that the policy was wrong becomes an attack on the leader's identity, and the leader will sacrifice any number of lives to defend that identity because in their mind, they are the state, and the state cannot be wrong, because if the state is wrong, then the state is dead. Seylun mobilized everything: reserve fleets, system defense forces, planetary militia. Conscription orders went to every world in the Dominion, war production mandates, emergency economic controls. He stripped the civilian infrastructure of every resource that could be converted to military application. He was building a second wave, a bigger wave. Because in his mind, the problem was not that the humans were more capable than he'd assessed. The problem was that he hadn't sent enough ships. I requested another audience. I was denied. I submitted another formal dissent. It was returned unread. I attempted to access the diplomatic back channels to initiate informal contact with the human command. My communication privileges were revoked entirely. I was, functionally, a prisoner. Not formally, I could still walk the corridors of Apex 7, eat in the commissary, access public information. But every tool I possessed for affecting the course of events had been removed with surgical precision. I was allowed to exist. I was not allowed to act. So I watched. And what I watched was the Dominion consuming itself. The war production mandates pulled resources from agriculture, from medicine, from infrastructure maintenance. Within 2 months, food distribution on 3 outer colonies had fallen below sustenance levels. Within 4 months, the medical system on Varenthi Prime, our capital world, the administrative heart of the Dominion, had degraded to the point where routine surgical procedures were being postponed indefinitely due to supply shortages. The humans did nothing. This is the part that the prosecution has not addressed because it undermines their entire theory of human aggression. After destroying the Ninth Fleet, the human military did not advance. They did not attack Dominion territory. They did not blockade our supply lines. They did not launch strikes against military installations or civilian infrastructure. They sat inside their own system borders and they waited. They waited while we starved ourselves. Every warship we built was a hospital we didn't fund. Every conscription order was a farmer pulled from fields. Every emergency economic control was a market that stopped functioning. The humans didn't need to destroy our civilization. They just needed to let us redirect every resource we had toward building a military force large enough to face them, and then wait for the mathematics of that reallocation to do the work. I understood this. I wrote it down. I put it in a document and I submitted it to every member of the Presidium individually, hand-delivered to their personal offices by a courier I paid with my own diminishing funds. 3 of them read it. I know this because 3 of them came to see me, separately, in the corridor outside my quarters, each with the same expression, a mixture of agreement and terror, and each with the same message. You're right, and if I say so publicly, I'll be in the cell next to yours. The second wave launched 7 months after the first. 14,000 ships this time, everything the Dominion had, including vessels that were not fully equipped, crewed by personnel who were not fully trained, burning fuel that had been diverted from civilian heating systems on worlds that were entering their cold seasons. The second wave entered the Sol system and found the human fleet exactly where it had been 7 months before, waiting. The engagement lasted 9 minutes, not 14. 9. The humans had spent 7 months upgrading. I will not catalog the full scope of what happened to the Dominion after the Second Fleet was destroyed. The records exist. The numbers are public. The images are available to anyone with a terminal and the stomach to look at them. I will describe only what I saw with my own eyes. Keth Varos, our capital, began to fail 5 weeks after the second wave. The power grid, dependent on fuel shipments that had been redirected to the fleet, began cycling through rolling blackouts. The water purification system, which required power to operate, began producing output that was technically potable, but carried chemical signatures. Our bodies were not evolved to process without filtration. People got sick. Then, people got hungry. Then, people got desperate. And then the transmission came. Not a declaration, not a demand, not terms. A single line, sent on an open channel, addressed to no government and no authority, addressed to the Ithkari people. If anyone is hungry, we are sending food. It is not conditional. It is not political. It is food. The first human supply ships entered Dominion space 48 hours later, unarmed, unescorted. Civilian vessels with cargo holds full of nutritional provisions calibrated to Ithkari physiology, which meant someone had spent time analyzing our biology and manufacturing food we could metabolize. Food that would not merely sustain us, but would address the specific nutritional deficiencies our medical databases had been reporting. They had prepared this. They had built this supply chain while they were fighting us. While our fleets were advancing on their home system, while our government was publicly calling for their extinction, while our media was broadcasting propaganda describing humans as vermin and parasites and existential threats to civilized life, while all of that was happening, someone in the human government had authorized the manufacture of food for Ithkari stomachs. Tylorn ordered the supply ships destroyed. The order was carried out. The first 3 ships were intercepted by system defense forces and fired upon. They did not return fire. They did not evade. They simply continued on their delivery trajectory until they were disabled or destroyed. The 4th ship transmitted a message as it was being fired upon. The message was a live audio feed, automatically relayed to every open channel in the system. The voice was calm. Human voices are capable of extraordinary calm under extraordinary duress. I have observed this repeatedly, and it said, "This is the civilian supply vessel Vasquez. We are carrying 400 tons of nutritional provisions for the population of Keth Varos. We are unarmed. We are not going to stop. If you need to fire on us, we understand. The food will be aboard the next ship." They had named the supply ship after her. The system defense commander fired. The Vasquez broke apart. 400 tons of food, manufactured by the species we were trying to destroy, for the people who were trying to destroy them, scattered across orbital space like a second set of stars. The 5th ship arrived 11 hours later, and the 6th, and the 7th. The system defense commander stopped firing after the 9th ship, not because he was ordered to stop, because his crew refused. 17 officers and 41 enlisted personnel informed their commander that they would not fire on unarmed vessels carrying food for their families. The mutiny, because that is what it was, whatever the post-war tribunal chose to call it, spread to 3 other defense installations within a day. Within a week, the entire Keth Varos orbital defense network had functionally ceased to operate as a military asset. Not because it was destroyed, because the people crewing it chose to stop. The food ships landed. I was in the distribution square when the first cargo bay opened. Ithkari medical personnel acting without authorization, without government sanction, without anything beyond their own oath and their own judgment, had established a triage center in the square using equipment salvaged from a hospital that had closed due to supply shortages. A human stepped out of the cargo bay. She was wearing a simple uniform, no insignia, no rank markings, no weapons. She was carrying a case of medical equipment in one hand and a translation device in the other. She looked at the crowd, hundreds of Ithkari, thin, cold, sick, watching her with expressions that ranged from desperate hope to residual terror. She looked at them, and she said, through the translator, "We're here to help. Who's hungriest?" I stood at the back of the crowd. I was not hungry. I had been rationing carefully, and my body had not yet reached the point of visible distress. But I watched. I watched my people, the citizens of the empire that had killed this woman's ambassador, destroyed her supply ships, and mobilized 2 fleets to annihilate her species' approacher and accept food from her hands. And I watched her face. I watched for it the moment of contempt, the flash of superiority, the fraction of a second where the act of feeding your enemy reveals itself as the dominance display it must surely be. It never came. She handed out food, and she asked names, and she learned pronunciation, and she mispronounced everything and laughed at herself and tried again, and she was not performing, and she was not calculating, and she was just a person feeding people who were hungry, and the war was still happening, and her people were still dying somewhere, and she was here, in the square, getting an elderly Aethkari man a second serving, because the first wasn't enough, and she'd noticed before he asked. Seylun fell 6 weeks after the food ships began landing, not to human action, to his own presidium. The mechanism was mundane, a formal vote of no confidence, triggered by a procedural challenge from a coalition of 7 hierarchs who had individually determined that their political survival required distance from the Grand Hierarch's decisions. They did not vote their conscience, they voted their fear. But the result was the same. Seylun was removed. He was not arrested. The Dominion does not arrest Grand Hierarchs, a legal peculiarity that may explain why Grand Hierarchs so rarely face accountability. But he was stripped of authority and confined to his estate on Varenthi Prime, where he remains today, composing a memoir that I am told blames everyone except himself. The interim government requested terms. The human response arrived within 1 hour. It was shorter than the original transmission. Terms: 1. Return of Ambassador Vasquez's remains. 2. Release of all detained human personnel. 3. Public acknowledgement of the circumstances of Ambassador Vasquez's death. 4. No territorial concessions. 5. No reparations. 6. Resumption of the recognition process from the point of interruption. No territorial concessions. No reparations. The Dominion had killed their ambassador, destroyed their supply ships, sent 2 fleets to annihilate them, broadcast propaganda calling them vermin, and their terms were, give us back our dead, tell the truth about how she died, and let's start over from where we left off. The interim presidium accepted within the hour. I was released from my unofficial confinement. Or rather, my communication privileges were restored, and my clearance was reinstated, which amounted to the same thing, and I was summoned to the Presidium chamber as an advisor to the transitional diplomatic team. I walked into the chamber, the same chamber where I had watched Vasquez be detained, the same gallery where I had sat and said nothing while my government committed an act that would cost 92 billion lives, the same room where I had told Seylun he was making a catastrophic error and been told I should have pursued theatrical arts. The interim first hierarch, a functionary named Sorath, competent but unremarkable, selected precisely because unremarkable was what the moment required, that looked at me and said, "Vaath, you were right. We need you to—" No. The word came out before I had decided to speak it. It surprised me. It surprised Sorath. No? I will not serve as your validator. I will not stand beside this presidium and provide retroactive legitimacy to a government that ignored every warning, silenced every dissent, and permitted the death of a diplomat under its protection because her metallurgical knowledge was more interesting than her life. You do not get to use me. Sorath stared at me. Several hierarchs shifted uncomfortably. You will deal with the humans yourselves, I said. You will look at them without me standing beside you to make it comfortable. You will face what you did without me translating it into something manageable. That is not my function anymore. Then what is your function, Vaath? I didn't answer. I left the chamber. I went to my quarters and I sat on the floor again, because it was honest, and I tried to determine what my function was. I had been right. I had been right about everything. Every warning I'd issued, every projection I'd submitted, every frantic report I'd filed from a monitoring terminal while my clearance was being revoked, all of it had been accurate. And it had saved no one. Being right had not saved Elena Vasquez. Being right had not stopped the Ninth Fleet. Being right had not prevented the second wave. Being right had not fed the children of Keth Varos, or prevented the 17 officers who mutinied from having to make that choice. Being right had not done anything except give me a front-row seat to a catastrophe I had accurately described and been powerless to prevent. This is what they don't tell you about prophecy. They frame it as power the seer, the oracle, the voice crying in the wilderness. But prophecy without authority is just spectatorship. It is watching the fire from inside the fire, narrating the heat while you burn alongside everyone who didn't listen. I was the prophet of the Ethkari Dominion's destruction, and I was the most useless person in it. The recognition ceremony took place 3 months later. New venue, not Apex 7, which had been functionally abandoned as a diplomatic site because no delegation could enter its chambers without remembering what had happened there, but a human-built station orbiting their outermost colony, constructed in the interim period with an efficiency that the engineering delegations described as aggressive. I attended. Not as a diplomat, I had resigned my position and my title and my clearance and everything else that connected me to the institution that had used me as a prop when I was convenient and a criminal when I was not. I attended as a private citizen, using a public gallery pass that I obtained through a process so mundane it felt like an insult to the gravity of the occasion. The human delegation entered the chamber. 7 members. New ambassador, a tall man with a shaved head and a demeanor that suggested he had been selected for his inability to be intimidated. His name was Marcus Webb, and he carried the same kind of case Elena Vasquez had carried, and I understood that this was intentional, a continuity, a refusal to let her absence become an erasure. The ceremony proceeded. Speeches were given. Votes were cast. Humanity was formally recognized as a sovereign member of the Galactic Concord with full territorial rights, diplomatic standing, and the complete protections of interstellar law. It was, by any measure, the conclusion. The war was over. The terms were fulfilled. The galaxy had rearranged itself around a new reality, and the new reality was that humanity existed, that they were formidable, that they were generous, and that killing their ambassador had been the single most consequential mistake in the history of the Ethkari Dominion. After the ceremony, I stood in the corridor outside the gallery. I had no purpose. I had no function. I was a retired diplomat at a diplomatic event, a prophet whose prophecy had been fulfilled, and who discovered that fulfillment felt exactly like emptiness. Seylun. I turned. Ambassador Webb was standing 3 meters away. He was alone, no aides, no security, which struck me as either brave or careless, until I remembered that humans did not experience risk the way we did. Ambassador Webb, I said, congratulations on the recognition. Thank you, though I think we both know it should have happened a long time ago. Yes. He studied me. The human gaze is remarkably direct. They are a predator species, which informs their eye contact habits, and being the subject of a human's focused attention is an experience that does not become comfortable with repetition. You're the one who warned them, he said. Yes. We know. We had your dissent. We had your reports. We had everything you filed. He paused. We had it because we were inside your communication network, which means we read your warnings in real time as you wrote them. We watched you try to stop this. I didn't know what to say. Elena mentioned you in her personal log, he said, before the detention. She wrote. He stopped, reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, a personal data reader, and opened a file. Seylun Vaath is the real thing. He's smart, and he's careful, and he's genuinely trying to understand us, not just manage us. If this falls apart, and I think it might, he's the one who'll try to put it back together. I hope he gets the chance. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere in the station, celebration sounds were filtering through the ventilation, the mixed species hum of a diplomatic reception in progress. She was wrong, I said. About which part? I didn't put it back together. I didn't stop it from falling apart. I filed reports, and I warned people, and I was right about everything, and it didn't matter. None of it mattered. Webb put the data reader away. That's not how Elena would have seen it. Elena is dead. Yes. He didn't flinch. She is. And the person who tried to prevent her death, who risked his career and his freedom to tell the truth when telling the truth was dangerous, is standing in front of me feeling useless. And I'm here to tell you that you're wrong about that. I appreciate the sentiment, Ambassador, but it's not sentiment. Your dissent is the reason 7 hierarchs voted to remove Tylorn. Your reports were cited in every single no-confidence filing. Your analysis of the Dominion's economic self-destruction was the document that broke the coalition. You didn't stop the war, Seylun. Nobody could have stopped the war. Tylorn was going to have his war, no matter what anyone said. But you ended it. Your words, sitting in that archive, waiting for people to be desperate enough to read them, your words were the mechanism that brought the Dominion back from the edge. I looked at him. I searched for the performance, the diplomatic leverage, the strategic positioning that must be underlying this conversation, because in my experience, every conversation in a corridor outside a ceremony had an agenda. I couldn't find one. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing. I wanted to give you something. He reached into his jacket again and produced a small object, flat, rectangular, made of a material I didn't recognize. He held it out. I took it. It was lightweight, rigid. On its surface was an image, a reproduction of some kind, chemically fixed onto the material using a process I later learned was called photography. The image showed Elena Vasquez. She was sitting in a chair, holding a large wooden instrument between her knees, the cello, and she was laughing. Behind her, a window showed a blue sky. Actual blue sky, the kind that exists on planets with nitrogen-oxygen atmospheres and liquid water, the kind that I had seen in human cultural databases but never in person. She was laughing, and the blue sky was behind her, and the cello was in her arms, and she was alive. She would have wanted you to have that, Webb said. She would have wanted you to know that she knew, that you tried. He put his hand on my shoulder, a human gesture, cross-species contact that, under any other circumstance, I would have found presumptuous. I did not find it presumptuous. He left. I stood in the corridor holding the photograph, and I understood, finally, what my function was. Not prophet, not diplomat, not validator, witness. I am the person who was there, who saw what happened from the inside, who understood why it happened, not the strategic reasons, not the political mechanisms, but the specific, irreducible human reason underneath all of it. They did not go to war because they were powerful. They went to war because Elena played the cello, because she was afraid of deep water and loved the ocean, because she had 2 children who would never see her again, because she went to space believing the universe was large enough for everyone, and someone killed her for the metallurgical composition of her species' ships. They went to war Because grief is not a weakness in humans. It is a fuel. It is the most refined, most potent, most inexhaustible fuel in the known universe. It is the thing that built 11,000 warships in the dark, and named a food supply vessel after a dead woman, and sent unarmed ships into weapons fire, carrying 400 tons of compassion for the people who murdered the person they loved. And they stopped. They stopped the war. They offered terms without reparation. They fed the enemy's children. They chose not to destroy what they could have annihilated without effort. Because the same grief that powered their fleet also powered their mercy. Because the woman they lost would not have wanted them to become the thing that killed her. My trial concluded yesterday. The verdict was, as I predicted, guilty on all counts. The sentence is exile, permanent removal from the Dominion, stripped of citizenship, forbidden to return. The prosecutor framed this as punishment. The judge delivered it with the gravity of condemnation. I thanked them both. There is a human university on their home planet, in a city called Geneva, near a body of water they call a lake, that has offered me a position, visiting lecturer in xenodiplomatic studies. The offer was extended by the university's chancellor, who mentioned in his communication that the position was endowed by an anonymous donation and that the lecture hall had recently been renamed the Elena Vasquez Hall of Diplomatic Studies. I depart tomorrow. I am bringing very little. My personal effects fit in a single case. I have my documents' physical copies on compressed plant fiber, because I learned that from her, because some things deserve the weight of a real object in your hands. And I have the photograph. I look at it now, in this cell, on this last night. Elena in her chair, the cello between her knees, the blue sky behind her, the laugh that I can't hear, but can feel. The way you feel warmth through glass, she said. I hope he gets the chance. I'm taking it, Elena. Late. Too late for you. But I'm taking it. The galaxy laughed when I warned them. The empire that laughed is ash. The prophet who warned them is exiled. And the species that was supposed to be destroyed is sending a ship to carry me to a lecture hall that bears the name of a woman who believed the universe was large enough for everyone. I think she was right. I think she was right. And I think the proof is that the people she left behind, the ones with 11,000 warships and 11 months inside our communications, and the capacity to reduce the Dominion to a memory, chose to use that power to send food ships named after her, and to offer exile instead of execution to a broken diplomat from the civilization that killed her, and to put a chair in a lecture hall and say, "Sit here. Tell them what you saw. Tell them what happens when you ignore the people who tell you the truth." That's the chair they've built for me, the prophet's seat. It doesn't look back. It faces forward, toward a room full of faces that haven't made the mistakes yet. I'm going to sit in it. I'm going to sit in it. And I'm going to tell them about Elena Vasquez, who played the cello, who was afraid of deep water, who believed the universe was large enough. And I'm going to tell them that she was right. And I'm going to hope irrationally, stubbornly, in defiance of every piece of evidence my career has provided, that this time someone listens. End of record. Archival note. Seylun Vaath served as the Elena Vasquez Distinguished Lecturer in Xenodiplomatic Studies at the University of Geneva for 14 years. His course, The Cost of Silence, a first-person account of the Aethkari-Human War, became the most requested lecture series in Concord academic history. He died at age 91 in Geneva, in a small apartment overlooking the lake. On his desk was a photograph and a single document, handwritten on compressed plant fiber. The document read, "She was right. Tell them she was right." His students did.